The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of the Palazzo Vecchio as Lorenzo de' Medici received word that his enemies had gathered in secret council. Most men would have panicked, called for guards, or fled the city under cover of darkness. Lorenzo simply smiled, dismissing the messenger with a wave of his jeweled hand. He had spent years preparing for this moment, not by building walls or hiring armies, but by destroying every weakness within himself that his enemies might exploit. This is the essence of true power, the secret that separates those who rule from those who are ruled. It is not found in manipulation or cunning alone, though these have their place. True power comes from the systematic destruction of one's own vulnerabilities, the careful cultivation of strengths that others cannot touch, and the deep understanding of human nature that allows one to navigate the treacherous waters of social and political life with grace and precision. The weak man seeks to control others while remaining a slave to his own impulses, fears, and desires. The strong man first conquers himself, and, in doing so, becomes unconquerable by others. This ancient wisdom, encoded in the writings of Niccolò Machiavelli and practiced by history's most successful leaders, remains as relevant today as it was 500 years ago. In boardrooms and backroom deals, in academic institutions and social circles, in every arena where human beings gather to compete for resources, status, and influence, the same fundamental dynamics play out. Those who understand these dynamics, who have mastered themselves first and human nature second, rise to the top. Those who remain ignorant of these forces become pawns in games they do not even know they are playing. The transformation begins with a simple recognition: most people operate from a position of fundamental weakness. They are driven by emotions they do not understand, controlled by fears they refuse to acknowledge, and limited by beliefs they have never examined. They seek validation from others while offering their own approval freely. They reveal their intentions through careless words and actions, telegraph their moves like amateur chess players, and wonder why more sophisticated opponents seem to anticipate their every strategy. Consider the executive who loses his temper in meetings, revealing his insecurities to competitors who will use this knowledge against him. Observe the politician who cannot resist the temptation to boast about his achievements, providing opponents with ammunition for future attacks. Watch the entrepreneur who forms emotional attachments to business partners, clouding his judgment when difficult decisions must be made. These are not inherently bad people, they are simply operating from positions of weakness that more strategic minds will inevitably exploit. The path to true power requires a different approach entirely. It begins with what the ancient Stoics called the discipline of desire, the systematic elimination of wants and needs that place you at the mercy of others. When you desperately need approval, others gain power over you by withholding or granting it. When you fear loss of status, competitors can manipulate you by threatening your reputation. When you cannot control your emotional reactions, adversaries learn to push your buttons with surgical precision. But, when you have destroyed these weaknesses within yourself, when you no longer need what others can give or take away, you become a force that others cannot easily predict, control, or defeat. This is not emotional numbing or sociopathic detachment. It is strategic emotional intelligence applied to the most important relationship you will ever have, the one with yourself. The process begins with brutal self-assessment. Most people avoid this work because it requires confronting uncomfortable truths about their own limitations, failures, and self-deceptions. They prefer the comfortable lies that society encourages, that they are victims of circumstances beyond their control, that their problems stem from external forces, that success is largely a matter of luck or connections. True power requires abandoning these comforting delusions in favor of radical personal responsibility. Every failure becomes a lesson in strategy. Every setback reveals a weakness to be eliminated. Every conflict provides data about human nature that can be applied in future situations. This mindset transforms obstacles into opportunities and defeats into education. Take the businessman who loses a major contract to a competitor who underbid his proposal. The weak response is to complain about unfair tactics or price wars that hurt the industry. The powerful response is to analyze exactly how the competitor gathered information about the bid, what relationships allowed them to underprice the project, and what weaknesses in his own organization made this defeat possible. Armed with this knowledge, he adjusts his strategy, strengthens his intelligence-gathering capabilities, and ensures that future competitions unfold on more favorable terms. This analytical approach must extend to every aspect of life. Relationships become laboratories for understanding human motivation and influence. Social interactions provide opportunities to practice reading body language, detecting deception, and calibrating the precise amount of information to reveal or conceal in different circumstances. Even casual conversations become exercises in strategic thinking. The key is developing what might be called emotional detachment with strategic engagement. You participate fully in human interactions while maintaining an inner observer who analyzes patterns, motivations, and power dynamics with scientific objectivity. This dual consciousness, simultaneously engaged and detached, allows you to respond to situations from a position of strength rather than reacting from emotional impulse. Most people reveal their thoughts, feelings, and intentions through a constant stream of verbal and nonverbal communication. They complain about their problems, boast about their successes, and telegraph their insecurities through defensive reactions to criticism. They form opinions quickly and express them freely, often without considering how this information might be used against them. The strategically minded individual operates differently. Every word is chosen for its effect. Every gesture serves a purpose. Information is shared selectively, with careful consideration of how it advances specific objectives. This is not deception, it is precision. The difference between a shotgun and a sniper rifle is not moral but tactical. Consider how this principle applies to negotiations. The amateur reveals his budget constraints, timeline pressures, and alternative options, believing that honesty will lead to fair treatment. The professional carefully controls information flow, using strategic questions to understand the other party's position while revealing only what serves his purposes. When the amateur wonders why he consistently gets outmaneuvered, the professional has already moved on to the next opportunity. This information asymmetry extends beyond formal negotiations to every interaction where interests conflict or align. The job interview becomes an exercise in projecting competence while gathering intelligence about organizational culture and decision-making processes. The social gathering provides opportunities to observe relationship dynamics and identify potential allies or adversaries. The casual conversation with a colleague might reveal crucial information about upcoming organizational changes. The transformation of consciousness required for this level of strategic thinking cannot happen overnight. It requires consistent practice and careful observation of results. Begin by paying attention to your own patterns of information sharing. Notice when you reveal more than necessary, when emotions drive your communication, when you seek validation or approval from others. These moments of weakness, once recognized, become opportunities for improvement. Simultaneously, begin studying the communication patterns of others. Notice how successful people in your field control information, manage relationships, and respond to challenges. Observe how they handle criticism, present ideas, and navigate organizational politics. Pay attention to the subtle ways they influence outcomes without appearing manipulative or aggressive. The goal is not to become coldly calculating but to develop the strategic awareness that allows you to operate effectively in environments where others are already thinking strategically. The choice is not between being moral and being effective, it is between being conscious and unconscious of the dynamics that are already shaping your experiences. Many people resist this level of strategic thinking because they believe it compromises their authenticity or integrity. This resistance usually stems from a fundamental misunderstanding of both concepts. True authenticity is not the unconscious expression of every passing emotion or thought, it is the conscious alignment of actions with values and objectives. Integrity is not the absence of strategy, it is the refusal to pursue objectives through methods that violate your core principles. The most powerful individuals in history have been those who combined strategic thinking with genuine moral purpose. They understood human nature deeply enough to navigate complex social and political environments while maintaining their commitment to larger goals and values. They were not naive about the realities of power, but neither were they corrupted by their understanding of these realities. This balance requires what might be called principled pragmatism, the ability to work within existing systems while maintaining your own moral center. It means understanding that the world operates according to certain rules, whether we approve of those rules or not, and developing the skills necessary to achieve positive outcomes within those constraints. The alternative, moral purity without strategic effectiveness, often leads to powerlessness and irrelevance. The idealist who refuses to understand power dynamics becomes a victim of those who do understand them. The honest person who will not learn the rules of influence finds his good intentions constantly thwarted by more sophisticated operators. The path forward requires embracing both moral purpose and strategic competence. This begins with the fundamental work of self-mastery, identifying and eliminating the weaknesses that place you at the mercy of others while developing the strengths that allow you to pursue your objectives effectively. The first area requiring attention is emotional regulation. Most people are controlled by their emotions rather than controlling them. They react rather than respond, allowing external circumstances to determine their internal state. This emotional reactivity creates predictable patterns that others can exploit. Anger, for instance, clouds judgment and leads to poor decisions. The person who cannot control his temper reveals his trigger points to anyone paying attention. Competitors learn to provoke angry reactions at crucial moments, knowing that emotional decisions are usually bad decisions. The solution is not to suppress anger but to develop the ability to choose when and how to express it strategically. Fear operates similarly. The person who is visibly afraid of conflict, confrontation, or loss telegraphs his vulnerabilities to anyone willing to apply pressure. Others quickly learn that he can be controlled through intimidation or threats, real or implied. Overcoming this weakness requires gradually expanding your comfort zone and developing confidence in your ability to handle difficult situations. Desire for approval represents another common weakness. When you need others to like you, validate your decisions, or confirm your worth, you hand them enormous power over your life. They can manipulate you by threatening to withdraw approval or promising to grant it. Breaking free from this pattern requires developing internal sources of validation and learning to make decisions based on your own judgment rather than others' opinions. The process of eliminating these emotional vulnerabilities is not about becoming emotionless but about becoming emotionally intelligent. You learn to understand your own emotional patterns, recognize when emotions might cloud your judgment, and develop the ability to pause between stimulus and response. This pause, even if it lasts only a few seconds, creates the space for strategic thinking rather than reactive behavior. Physical and mental discipline support this emotional regulation. The person who cannot control his diet, exercise routine, or sleep schedule demonstrates a lack of self-mastery that extends to other areas of life. Conversely, the individual who maintains high standards for physical fitness and mental clarity projects competence and self-control that others find both attractive and intimidating. This discipline extends to how you present yourself to the world. Your appearance, speech patterns, and body language constantly communicate information about your character, competence, and confidence. Most people pay little attention to these signals, missing opportunities to create positive impressions and accidentally undermining their own influence. The strategically minded individual understands that perception often shapes reality in human interactions. The person who looks successful, speaks with authority, and carries himself with confidence will be treated differently than someone who appears uncertain, unprepared, or insecure. This is not shallow image management but practical psychology applied to real-world situations. Consider how this principle operates in professional environments. The employee who dresses slightly better than required, speaks with precision and confidence, and maintains excellent posture will be perceived as more competent than equally qualified colleagues who neglect these details. Over time, these perceptions translate into concrete advantages, better assignments, faster promotions, and increased influence within the organization. The same dynamics operate in social and personal relationships. The individual who maintains high personal standards, speaks thoughtfully, and demonstrates self-respect will attract higher quality relationships than someone who appears careless about their own development and presentation. This is not superficiality, it is recognition that humans make rapid judgments based on available information, and controlling that information serves everyone's interests. The development of strategic communication skills represents another crucial area of development. Most people communicate unconsciously, saying whatever comes to mind without considering the effect of their words on listeners. They share personal information freely, express opinions without invitation, and fail to recognize when silence might serve their interests better than speech. Powerful communication requires understanding your audience's interests, concerns, and motivations. Before speaking, ask yourself what outcome you hope to achieve and how your words might advance or hinder that objective. This does not mean becoming manipulative, but rather becoming intentional about your communication. In business contexts, this might mean framing proposals in terms of benefits to the organization rather than personal advantages to yourself. Instead of saying, "I want a promotion because I've been here for 3 years," you might say, "I believe my expanded responsibilities in the marketing department have positioned me to take on broader strategic challenges that would benefit the company's growth objectives." The difference is not dishonest, both statements express a desire for advancement. But the second version frames the request in terms of value creation rather than personal entitlement, making it easier for decision-makers to approve. This principle of audience-centered communication applies to every interaction where you hope to influence outcomes. The parent seeking cooperation from a teenager speaks differently than the salesperson presenting to corporate executives, but both benefit from understanding their audience's perspective and framing their message accordingly. The ability to read subtext and unspoken communication represents another crucial skill. Most important communication happens beneath the surface of explicit words. People communicate their true feelings, intentions, and concerns through tone of voice, body language, and what they choose not to say. Developing the ability to read these signals provides enormous advantages in understanding what is really happening in complex situations. When a colleague says, "That's an interesting idea," with a flat tone and closed body language, they are probably not enthusiastic about your proposal. When a client asks many detailed questions about implementation timelines, they may be more serious about moving forward than someone who offers immediate enthusiasm without substance. When someone repeatedly mentions their busy schedule, they may be communicating that they do not want to take on additional commitments. Learning to read these signals accurately requires careful observation and practice. Start by paying attention to the consistency between people's words and their nonverbal communication. Notice when someone's tone does not match their stated message, when their body language contradicts their claims, or when their actions reveal different priorities than their spoken commitments. Over time, you will develop an intuitive sense for when people are fully engaged, partially interested, or merely being polite. This information allows you to adjust your approach accordingly, investing time and energy where it is most likely to produce results while avoiding situations where you are unlikely to achieve your objectives. The strategic use of silence represents one of the most underappreciated communication tools. In a culture that values constant talking and immediate responses, the person who speaks thoughtfully and listens carefully gains significant advantages. Silence creates space for others to reveal information they might not have intended to share. It projects confidence and control rather than nervousness or uncertainty. It allows you to process information before responding rather than reacting impulsively. Practice incorporating strategic pauses into your communication. When asked a challenging question, take a moment to consider your response before speaking. When someone makes an emotional statement, resist the urge to fill the silence immediately. Allow others to complete their thoughts without interruption, even when you disagree with their perspective. These practices serve multiple purposes. They demonstrate respect for others' viewpoints, which often makes people more receptive to your own ideas. They provide valuable information about others' thinking processes and emotional states. They position you as thoughtful and deliberate rather than impulsive or reactive. The cumulative effect of these improvements in self-mastery, emotional regulation, strategic communication, and social awareness is profound. You begin operating from a position of strength rather than weakness, making decisions based on careful analysis rather than emotional impulse, and influencing outcomes through conscious choice rather than unconscious reaction. This transformation becomes evident in how you handle conflicts, challenges, and opportunities. Instead of being surprised by others' behavior, you begin to anticipate their likely responses based on your understanding of their motivations and patterns. Instead of reacting defensively to criticism or opposition, you evaluate feedback objectively and respond strategically. Instead of being manipulated by others' emotional appeals or pressure tactics, you maintain your own agenda while appearing considerate of their concerns. The compound effects of these changes extend far beyond immediate tactical advantages. As your reputation for competence, reliability, and strategic thinking grows, you attract higher quality opportunities and relationships. People begin seeking your advice and collaboration because they recognize your ability to navigate complex situations effectively. Your influence expands naturally because others trust your judgment and value your perspective. This expanding influence creates what might be called positive feedback loops of power. Success builds reputation, which creates opportunities for greater success, which further enhances reputation. The person who consistently demonstrates strategic thinking and reliable execution becomes someone others want to work with, invest in, and promote. Understanding these dynamics allows you to accelerate your own development by consistently exceeding expectations in small ways. The employee who always delivers projects on time and slightly above specifications builds a reputation for reliability that leads to more challenging and rewarding assignments. The entrepreneur who underpromises and overdelivers creates customer loyalty that fuels sustainable growth. The leader who acknowledges problems honestly while focusing on solutions builds trust that makes future challenges easier to navigate. This approach requires patience and long-term thinking. The benefits compound over time rather than appearing immediately. The person seeking quick wins or dramatic shortcuts will often undermine their own long-term interests. But those willing to invest in systematic self-improvement and relationship building will find that their influence and opportunities expand consistently over years and decades. The foundation of this entire approach rests on the principle stated at the beginning: the man who destroys his weak self can never be destroyed by others. When you no longer need what others can withhold: approval, validation, security, comfort, you become immune to their attempts at manipulation or control. When you have eliminated your own weaknesses and developed genuine strengths, you operate from a position that others cannot easily undermine. This is not about becoming invulnerable to all harm or challenge. Life will always present difficulties that require adaptation and growth. Rather, it is about developing the internal resources and external relationships that allow you to handle whatever circumstances arise with grace, wisdom, and effectiveness. The journey toward this level of strategic self-mastery begins with a single step: the honest assessment of your current strengths and weaknesses. Most people avoid this work because it requires confronting uncomfortable truths about their limitations and failures. But this initial discomfort is the price of admission to a life of greater freedom, influence, and effectiveness. As you embark on this transformation, remember that the goal is not to become someone else but to become the best version of yourself. The principles and practices described here are tools for unlocking your potential, not recipes for mimicking others' success. Your unique combination of talents, experiences, and values will shape how you apply these concepts to your specific circumstances and objectives. The work ahead is challenging but ultimately liberating. Each weakness you eliminate, each skill you develop, and each relationship you strengthen contributes to your growing immunity from others' attempts to control or manipulate you. This is true freedom, not the absence of constraints or challenges, but the presence of internal resources that allow you to navigate any situation with confidence and purpose. The merchant prince stood at the edge of the crowded marketplace, watching as two rival traders argued over a shipment of silk that both claimed to have purchased. A lesser man might have seen only chaos, perhaps an opportunity to acquire goods at reduced prices while the competitors destroyed each other. But Antonio saw something far more valuable: a perfect demonstration of how emotional attachment to outcomes creates exploitable weaknesses. Within an hour, he had quietly spoken to both traders, offering each a seemingly generous solution to their dispute. Neither realized that Antonio's proposed resolution would leave him controlling the silk trade route they had been fighting over. By evening, both men considered him a trusted mediator while he had positioned himself as the dominant force in a market they had inadvertently handed to him. This scene, played out in countless variations across centuries and cultures, illustrates the second great principle of strategic power: understanding and influencing human behavior through the systematic application of psychological insights. While the first principle focuses on internal mastery, destroying your own weaknesses, the second concerns external mastery, understanding and directing the weaknesses of others. The distinction between manipulation and influence is crucial here. Manipulation seeks to benefit oneself at others' expense through deception or exploitation. Influence seeks to create outcomes that serve multiple parties' interests through understanding and alignment. The manipulator eventually destroys trust and relationships. The master of influence builds lasting alliances and sustainable advantages. This distinction matters not only morally but practically. Manipulation creates enemies who will eventually seek revenge. Influence creates allies who will support your objectives because they see how those objectives align with their own interests. The manipulator must constantly watch his back, knowing that his victims will turn against him when they discover his deceptions. The master of influence enjoys the compound benefits of relationships based on mutual value creation. The foundation of ethical influence lies in understanding what people truly want beneath their stated positions and surface behaviors. Most individuals are not fully conscious of their own motivations, needs, and fears. They pursue goals that they believe will satisfy deeper needs, often without examining whether those goals will actually deliver the satisfaction they seek. Consider the executive who claims to want more authority in his organization. On the surface, this appears to be a desire for power or control. But deeper investigation might reveal that he actually wants recognition for his expertise, security against organizational changes, or validation of his professional competence. Understanding these underlying needs allows you to craft solutions that address his real concerns while advancing your own objectives. The employee demanding a salary increase might actually be seeking acknowledgement of his contributions, comparison equity with colleagues, or security against financial uncertainty. The client pushing for lower prices might be concerned about budget constraints, competitive pressures, or simply testing your commitment to the relationship. In each case, addressing the surface demand without understanding the underlying need will produce temporary compliance at best and lasting resentment at worst. Developing this deeper understanding requires what psychologists call perspective taking, the ability to see situations through others' eyes and understand their emotional and rational frameworks. This is not mind reading or psychological manipulation but, rather, the fundamental empathy that allows human beings to cooperate effectively in complex situations. The practice begins with careful observation of patterns in people's behavior, communication, and decision-making. Notice what topics generate emotional responses, which outcomes they work hardest to achieve or avoid, and how they react to different types of pressure or incentives. Pay attention to the stories they tell about their successes and failures, the complaints they voice about their circumstances, and the aspirations they express for their futures. Over time, these observations reveal the underlying value systems and motivational patterns that drive behavior. Some people are primarily motivated by achievement and recognition. Others prioritize security and stability. Some seek autonomy and independence while others prefer belonging and community. Understanding these fundamental orientations allows you to frame proposals, requests, and opportunities in terms that resonate with each person's core motivations. The achievement-oriented individual responds to challenges, competitions, and opportunities to demonstrate competence. Frame your proposals in terms of goals to be reached, problems to be solved, or recognition to be earned. The security-oriented person responds to stability, predictability, and risk mitigation. Present your ideas as ways to reduce uncertainty, protect existing advantages, or provide backup plans for potential problems. This is not deception but translation, expressing your genuine objectives in the language that each person finds most compelling. The goal is to create authentic alignment between what you need and what they want, not to trick them into supporting objectives that conflict with their interests. The process becomes more sophisticated as you learn to identify and address emotional triggers and psychological patterns that operate beneath conscious awareness. Every person carries emotional associations with certain words, concepts, and situations based on their past experiences. Understanding these associations allows you to communicate in ways that generate positive rather than negative emotional responses. For instance, someone who has experienced micromanagement in previous roles will react negatively to any language that suggests close oversight or reduced autonomy, even when such oversight might be necessary for project success. Instead of saying, "I'll need daily progress reports," you might say, "How would you prefer to keep me informed about your progress so I can provide any support you need?" The communication achieves the same practical objective, regular updates on project status, while framing the requirement in terms of support rather than surveillance.
This subtle difference in language can mean the difference between enthusiastic cooperation and reluctant compliance. Similarly, understanding people's self-concept and identity allows you to frame requests in ways that reinforce rather than threaten their sense of who they are. The person who prides himself on being helpful will respond differently than someone who values being seen as an independent decision-maker. The individual who identifies as innovative and creative requires different approaches than someone who sees himself as practical and reliable. These insights develop through consistent practice in what might be called psychological pattern recognition. As you interact with people across different contexts and situations, you begin to notice recurring themes in how they interpret events, make decisions, and respond to various types of influence attempts. The anxious person often focuses on what could go wrong and seeks reassurance about potential problems. Address their concerns directly and provide clear contingency plans. The optimistic person tends to focus on potential benefits and opportunities. Lead with vision and possibility before discussing implementation details. The analytical person wants data, logic, and systematic reasoning. Present your arguments with supporting evidence and clear cause and effect relationships. The intuitive person responds to stories, emotions, and gut feelings. Use metaphors, analogies, and examples that help them visualize outcomes and feel confident about decisions. Learning to recognize and adapt to these different cognitive and emotional styles dramatically improves your ability to communicate effectively with diverse personalities and backgrounds. Rather than using the same approach with everyone, which works well with people who happen to share your style and fails with those who do not, you develop a flexible repertoire of influence strategies. This adaptability extends beyond individual interactions to understanding group dynamics and organizational politics. Every group develops its own culture, unwritten rules, and informal power structures. The person who understands these invisible systems can navigate them effectively. The person who remains oblivious to them will repeatedly encounter unexpected obstacles and resistance. In organizational settings, formal authority structures rarely tell the complete story of how decisions actually get made. The assistant who controls access to the executive often wields more practical influence than managers with impressive titles. The informal leader whom others trust and confide in may shape opinions more powerfully than official communications from leadership. Identifying these informal influence networks requires careful observation of communication patterns, relationship dynamics, and decision-making processes. Notice who gets consulted before important decisions, whose opinions carry weight in group discussions, and who has the ability to generate enthusiasm or resistance for new initiatives. The strategic person builds relationships across these formal and informal networks rather than focusing solely on obvious authority figures. The administrative professional who helps you navigate complex procedures, the colleague who provides insights about leadership preferences, and the team member who influences group morale all represent valuable relationship investments. These relationships are most effective when built on genuine mutual benefit rather than one-sided attempts to extract value. The assistant appreciates recognition for her expertise and contributions to organizational effectiveness. The informal leader values being consulted on decisions that affect team dynamics. The well-connected colleague benefits from exchange of information and mutual support. As these relationship networks develop, they create multiple pathways for achieving objectives and gathering information. Instead of relying on single points of contact or formal channels that might become blocked or compromised, you develop resilient systems for influence and intelligence gathering. The same principles apply to understanding competitive dynamics and market forces in business contexts. Every industry has its own cultures, relationship patterns, and informal rules for how business gets conducted. The outsider who attempts to succeed without understanding these dynamics will repeatedly encounter unexpected resistance and missed opportunities. Some industries prioritize long-term relationships over short-term profits. Others operate on quarterly cycles with intense focus on immediate results. Some value innovation and risk-taking while others prioritize stability and proven methods. Understanding these cultural differences allows you to adapt your approach accordingly. The technology startup environment rewards bold vision, rapid execution, and willingness to challenge established practices.
The traditional manufacturing sector values proven processes, careful risk management, and respect for experience and expertise.
The approaches that succeed in one environment may fail dramatically in the other. Developing this cultural intelligence requires immersion in the environments where you hope to succeed. Read industry publications, attend professional conferences, and build relationships with successful practitioners who can help you understand unwritten rules and expectations. Pay attention to the language people use, the values they express, and the behaviors that get rewarded or punished. Notice how successful individuals present themselves, handle conflicts, and build their reputations. Observe which strategies seem to work consistently and which approaches lead to failure or marginalization. This observational approach extends to understanding broader social and economic trends that shape opportunities and constraints. The person who recognizes emerging patterns before they become obvious to everyone else can position himself advantageously while others are still operating according to outdated assumptions. The rise of social media created new forms of influence and reputation management that earlier generations of business leaders did not need to consider. The shift toward remote work changed organizational dynamics and relationship building practices. Economic uncertainty altered risk tolerance and decision-making timelines across multiple industries. Staying ahead of these trends requires constant learning and pattern recognition across multiple information sources. Read beyond your immediate industry to understand broader technological, social, and economic developments. Pay attention to demographic changes, regulatory shifts, and cultural movements that might create new opportunities or threats. The goal is not to predict the future with perfect accuracy but to develop sensitivity to changing conditions that allows you to adapt more quickly than competitors who remain focused exclusively on current operations. This forward-thinking approach applies equally to personal relationship management and reputation building. Your reputation is essentially other people's collective assessment of your character, competence, and reliability based on their direct experiences and second-hand information about your behavior. Unlike your self-image, which you control directly, your reputation emerges from the accumulation of other people's perceptions and experiences. This makes reputation management both more complex and more important than many people realize. A strong reputation creates opportunities and resources that would be impossible to achieve through individual effort alone. A damaged reputation can destroy years of hard work and block access to future opportunities. Building a strong reputation requires consistency between your stated values and actual behaviors across multiple situations and relationships. People notice when someone acts differently depending on who is watching or what personal benefits might be available. The person who is professional with superiors but dismissive toward subordinates reveals character traits that others will remember and discuss. This consistency extends to how you handle confidential information, honor commitments, and respond to pressure or temptation. The individual who maintains high standards even when no one is watching builds a reputation for integrity that becomes a valuable asset in negotiations, partnerships, and leadership opportunities. Equally important is the strategic management of information about your capabilities, achievements, and objectives. Many competent people fail to receive appropriate recognition because they assume their work will speak for itself. Others undermine their credibility by overclaiming or taking credit for achievements that involved significant contributions from others. The strategic approach involves documenting your contributions to successful outcomes while acknowledging the support and collaboration that made those contributions possible. This demonstrates both competence and character, building credibility with colleagues who were involved in the work while providing clear evidence of your value to those who were not directly involved. Timing and context matter enormously in reputation management. Sharing information about your achievements during performance reviews or project debriefs is professional and appropriate. Bringing up your successes during unrelated conversations appears self-serving and undermines relationships. Similarly, how you handle failures and setbacks becomes part of your reputation. The person who accepts responsibility, learns from mistakes, and focuses on solutions builds trust and respect. The individual who makes excuses, blames others, or repeats the same errors develops a reputation for unreliability that becomes increasingly difficult to overcome. This principle extends to how you handle conflicts and disagreements with others.
Every organization and social group includes people with different perspectives, priorities, and working styles. How you navigate these differences while maintaining productive relationships demonstrates crucial leadership and interpersonal skills.
The strategic approach involves understanding the difference between positions and interests in any disagreement. Positions are what people say they want. Interests are why they want it. The colleague who insists on using a particular software platform, position, might be concerned about training time, compatibility with existing systems, or maintaining expertise that makes him valuable to the organization, interests. Focusing on interests rather than positions often reveals solutions that satisfy everyone's core concerns while avoiding zero-sum conflicts where someone must lose for others to win. This collaborative approach to problem-solving builds a reputation for wisdom and leadership that attracts higher quality opportunities and relationships. The development of these influence and relationship management skills requires consistent practice and self-reflection. Most people operate unconsciously in social and professional situations, reacting to immediate circumstances without considering the longer-term implications of their choices. The strategic individual develops what might be called social chess thinking, the ability to think several moves ahead in interpersonal dynamics. Before speaking or acting, consider how your words and behaviors might be interpreted by different audiences, what responses they might generate, and how those responses might affect your longer-term objectives and relationships. This is not paranoid overthinking but practical planning applied to the social dimension of life. Just as you would consider potential outcomes before making financial investments or career decisions, thinking through the relationship implications of your choices allows you to avoid unnecessary conflicts while building stronger alliances. The practice begins with small, low-stakes interactions where you can experiment with different approaches and observe their effects. Pay attention to how people respond to various communication styles, which types of requests generate cooperation versus resistance, and how your reputation and relationships evolve based on consistent patterns of behavior. Over time, you will develop intuitive sense for reading social and political dynamics in complex situations. This intuition is not mystical but the result of accumulated experience in pattern recognition and strategic thinking applied to human behavior. The compound effects of these skills become evident as your influence and opportunities expand naturally through the relationships and reputation you build. People seek your involvement in important projects because they trust your judgment and appreciate your collaborative approach. Your insights and opinions carry weight because others have seen evidence of your competence and reliability. This expanding influence creates positive feedback loops where success leads to greater opportunities, which provide platforms for demonstrating additional competence, which further enhances reputation and influence. The person who masters these dynamics finds that achieving objectives becomes easier over time as his network of relationships and reservoir of trust provide resources and support for new initiatives. The key insight underlying all of these principles is that human behavior follows predictable patterns based on psychological needs, emotional triggers, and social dynamics. Understanding these patterns and learning to work with them rather than against them provides enormous advantages in achieving objectives while building the relationships and reputation that support long-term success. This understanding, combined with the self-mastery discussed earlier, creates what might be called strategic social intelligence, the ability to navigate complex human environments with skill, ethics, and effectiveness. This is not manipulation or exploitation but, rather the sophisticated application of psychological insights to create outcomes that benefit multiple parties while advancing your own legitimate objectives. The person who develops these capabilities finds that most social and professional challenges become manageable because he understands the human dynamics underlying surface conflicts and complications. Instead of being frustrated by others' apparently irrational behavior, he recognizes the emotional and psychological factors driving that behavior and responds in ways that address underlying concerns while advancing practical solutions. This represents a fundamental shift from reactive to proactive approaches to human relationships and social challenges. Rather than being surprised by others' responses and scrambling to manage conflicts after they emerge, you begin to anticipate likely reactions and structure situations to generate more favorable outcomes from the beginning. The result is a dramatic improvement in your ability to achieve objectives while maintaining positive relationships, building lasting influence, and creating value for others as well as yourself.
This is true power, not the ability to force compliance through threats or manipulation, but the capacity to inspire cooperation through understanding, alignment, and mutual benefit. The storm that destroyed the harbor that winter evening might have ruined any other merchant in the city. Ships lay scattered across the docks like broken toys, cargo floated in the churning waters, and desperate men fought over salvageable goods in the chaos that followed. But Elena had spent the previous months carefully studying weather patterns, building relationships with every ship captain who used the port, and developing alternative supply chains that most of her competitors considered unnecessary redundancy. While others mourned their losses and complained about fate's cruelty, she quietly activated contingency plans that had been in place for precisely such circumstances. Within a week, she was not only fulfilling her own obligations but had become the primary supplier for competitors who found themselves unable to meet their commitments. The disaster that destroyed her rivals' businesses became the foundation of her dominance in regional trade. This illustrates the third and final principle of strategic power: the systematic creation of circumstances that work in your favor regardless of external conditions. While most people react to events as they unfold, hoping for favorable outcomes while fearing negative ones, the strategically minded individual proactively shapes situations to minimize downside risks while maximizing upside potential. This is not about controlling every variable in complex situations, an impossible task that leads to anxiety and disappointment. Rather, it involves understanding which factors you can influence, which you cannot, and how to position yourself to benefit from uncertainty and change rather than being victimized by them. The foundation of this approach lies in what military strategists call multiple contingency planning, developing several potential responses to likely scenarios rather than committing completely to a single prediction about how events will unfold. This hedging strategy protects against catastrophic losses while preserving flexibility to capitalize on unexpected opportunities. In business contexts, this might mean developing relationships with multiple suppliers rather than relying on a single source for critical materials. It involves building skills and knowledge that translate across industries rather than becoming completely dependent on one employer or economic sector. It means maintaining financial reserves that provide options during economic downturns rather than living at the edge of your means during prosperity. The same principle applies to personal relationships and social networks. The individual who invests all of his social energy in a single group or organization becomes vulnerable when circumstances change or conflicts arise. The person who cultivates diverse relationships across different contexts maintains options and support systems that provide resilience during challenging periods. This diversification strategy extends beyond simple risk management to the active creation of advantageous positions. Instead of waiting to see how situations develop and then reacting accordingly, the strategic person works to influence the development of situations in ways that favor his objectives and capabilities. Consider how this might apply to career development. Rather than simply performing assigned duties and hoping for recognition, the strategic professional identifies emerging needs within his organization and develops expertise in areas that align with those future requirements. When organizational changes create new opportunities, he is already positioned with relevant knowledge and relationships to capitalize on them. This requires developing sensitivity to early indicators of change, the weak signals that suggest shifts in organizational priorities, market conditions, or technological trends before they become obvious to everyone else. These signals might include changes in executive communication patterns, resource allocation decisions, or the types of projects receiving priority attention. The ability to recognize and interpret these signals represents a sophisticated form of pattern recognition that develops through consistent attention to the broader context surrounding immediate responsibilities. Instead of focusing exclusively on current tasks and objectives, maintain awareness of the forces that might shape future opportunities and challenges. This broader perspective requires what might be called strategic information gathering, the systematic collection and analysis of data about trends, relationships, and developments that might affect your long-term interests. This is not industrial espionage or inappropriate investigation, but rather the careful observation and analysis that any intelligent person should conduct to understand the environment in which he operates. Read beyond your immediate field to understand broader economic, technological, and social trends. Pay attention to regulatory changes, demographic shifts, and cultural developments that might create new opportunities or eliminate existing ones. Notice which individuals and organizations seem to be gaining or losing influence and what factors appear to be driving those changes. The goal is to develop a sophisticated understanding of the systems and networks that shape your professional and personal environment. This understanding allows you to make decisions based on likely future conditions rather than simply extrapolating from current circumstances. For instance, if demographic trends suggest that certain professional skills will become more valuable over the next decade, investing time in developing those capabilities now positions you advantageously before the demand becomes obvious to everyone else. If technological developments threaten to automate certain types of work, shifting toward roles that complement rather than compete with automation provides security against future displacement. This forward-thinking approach requires balancing preparation for likely scenarios with flexibility to adapt when unexpected developments occur. Overcommitment to a single prediction about the future creates the same vulnerabilities as failing to plan at all. The key is developing general capabilities and relationships that provide value across multiple possible scenarios. In practical terms, this means building what might be called transferable assets, skills, knowledge, relationships, and resources that remain valuable regardless of specific circumstances. Communication skills, analytical thinking, emotional intelligence, and the ability to learn quickly serve you well in virtually any professional environment. Strong relationships with diverse, capable individuals provide support and opportunities across changing circumstances. The development of these transferable assets requires consistent investment in personal growth and relationship building over time. Unlike specific technical skills that might become obsolete or particular job roles that might be eliminated, these fundamental capabilities compound in value as they improve and as you find new ways to apply them. This investment approach extends to financial resources and material assets. Rather than optimizing solely for current income or lifestyle, consider how your choices affect long-term flexibility and security. The person who maintains low fixed expenses and avoids debt has options during economic uncertainty that are not available to someone living at or beyond his means, regardless of current income levels. This is not about living in fear or avoiding reasonable risks, but rather about maintaining the freedom to make choices based on opportunity rather than necessity. When you are not dependent on any particular income source, employer, or relationship for survival, you can evaluate options based on their strategic value rather than immediate necessity. This financial independence creates what might be called strategic optionality, the ability to walk away from situations that are not working, invest time in long-term projects that might not provide immediate returns, and take calculated risks that could produce extraordinary rewards. These options are not available to someone operating from a position of financial desperation. The creation of strategic optionality extends beyond financial resources to time management and energy allocation. Most people fill their schedules completely with current obligations, leaving no capacity for unexpected opportunities or necessary responses to changing circumstances. This creates a form of temporal poverty that limits strategic flexibility. The strategic individual maintains what might be called strategic reserves, unscheduled time and uncommitted energy that can be deployed when opportunities arise or when situations require immediate attention. This might mean working at 80% of capacity during normal periods to preserve resources for intense periods that require exceptional effort. This approach requires saying no to many opportunities and requests that might be individually attractive but that collectively overwhelm your capacity for strategic action. The person who commits to every reasonable opportunity finds himself too busy managing current obligations to prepare for future ones or to capitalize on unexpected developments. Developing the discipline to maintain these strategic reserves while others fill every available moment with activities requires confidence in your own judgment and resistance to social pressure to constantly maximize activity levels. Many people equate busyness with importance and assume that someone who appears to have time available is not fully engaged with significant work. The strategic person understands that apparent availability often indicates superior planning and priority management rather than lack of important responsibilities. The executive who can take a last-minute meeting with an important client, the professional who can accept an unexpected project opportunity, and the individual who can provide support during someone else's crisis all benefit from maintaining capacity for strategic action. This principle applies equally to cognitive and emotional resources. Decision fatigue, stress, and mental exhaustion reduce the quality of strategic thinking and the effectiveness of interpersonal interactions. The person who consistently operates at maximum intensity cannot maintain the clarity and perspective required for high-level strategic decisions. Building sustainable systems and routines that minimize unnecessary decision-making and stress helps preserve mental energy for situations that truly require careful thinking and emotional intelligence. This might involve standardizing certain aspects of daily life to reduce decision fatigue, delegating routine tasks when possible, and maintaining physical and mental health practices that support sustained high performance. The strategic application of these principles requires understanding the difference between efficiency and effectiveness in different contexts. Efficiency involves doing things correctly, minimizing waste, and maximizing output from given inputs. Effectiveness involves doing the right things, focusing on activities that produce the most valuable outcomes. In routine operations, efficiency often takes priority. Streamlining processes, eliminating waste, and maximizing productivity provide clear benefits when objectives and methods are well established. But, in strategic situations, when objectives are unclear, methods are uncertain, or circumstances are changing rapidly, effectiveness becomes more important than efficiency. The person who efficiently pursues the wrong objectives or who optimizes methods for circumstances that no longer exist will find himself working harder while achieving less. The strategic individual regularly steps back from immediate tasks to evaluate whether his efforts are directed toward the most valuable objectives given current and anticipated circumstances. This evaluation process requires what might be called strategic reflection, regular assessment of whether your actions align with your longer-term objectives and whether those objectives remain appropriate given changing circumstances. This is not second-guessing every decision but, rather, periodic examination of fundamental assumptions and priorities. Many successful people fail to make this transition from tactical execution to strategic direction as their careers advance. They continue applying the detailed focus and intensive work habits that produced early success even when their new roles require broader perspective and different skills. The result is often frustration as increased effort fails to produce proportional improvements in outcomes. The strategic individual learns to operate effectively at different levels of abstraction and time horizons depending on the situation. When working on immediate problems, focus intensively on details and execution. When planning for longer-term objectives, think broadly about trends, relationships, and possibilities. This cognitive flexibility requires practice and conscious development. Most people become comfortable operating at one level and resist the uncertainty and ambiguity that characterize strategic thinking. The detailed analyst struggles with the imprecision required for long-term planning. The big-picture visionary becomes impatient with implementation details. Developing competence across different levels of thinking provides enormous advantages in complex environments where success requires both strategic vision and tactical execution. The leader who can articulate compelling long-term objectives while also understanding operational details builds credibility with both senior executives and frontline employees. This multi-level competence becomes especially valuable during periods of change or uncertainty when organizations need people who can think strategically while also managing practical implementation challenges. The person who can operate effectively at multiple levels becomes indispensable during transitions and transformations. The application of strategic thinking to relationship management represents another crucial area of development. Most people manage relationships reactively, responding to immediate situations and communications without considering longer-term patterns or objectives. This approach often leads to conflicts that could have been avoided and missed opportunities for deeper collaboration. The strategic approach involves understanding the natural development cycles of relationships and working with those patterns rather than against them. New relationships require time and mutual experience to develop trust and understanding. Attempting to accelerate this process through excessive sharing or premature requests for support often creates discomfort and resistance. Established relationships require ongoing attention and value creation to remain strong and mutually beneficial. Taking relationships for granted or assuming that past goodwill will continue indefinitely often leads to gradual deterioration that becomes apparent only when support is needed during challenging circumstances. Understanding these patterns allows you to invest appropriate time and energy in relationship development while avoiding common mistakes that damage trust or create unrealistic expectations. The strategic relationship manager thinks several years ahead when building networks, considering how current relationships might evolve and what new connections might become important as circumstances change. This long-term perspective requires patience and consistent effort over time. Unlike transactional relationships that focus on immediate exchanges of value, strategic relationships are built on mutual respect, shared experiences, and demonstrated reliability over multiple interactions and changing circumstances. The compound effects of strategic relationship building become evident during major transitions or challenging periods when the strength of your network determines what opportunities and support are available. The person who has invested consistently in diverse, high-quality relationships finds that others are eager to provide assistance, information, and collaboration when needed. Conversely, the individual who has focused exclusively on immediate transactional benefits from relationships often discovers that others are unwilling to invest time or take risks on his behalf when circumstances become challenging. The difference between these outcomes reflects years of different choices about how to approach relationship building and maintenance. The integration of all these strategic principles, self-mastery, influence skills, and circumstance management, creates what might be called strategic living. This is not a temporary adoption of tactics for specific situations but rather a comprehensive approach to life that maximizes long-term freedom, influence, and satisfaction while minimizing vulnerability to external circumstances. The person who masters these principles finds that most of life's challenges become manageable because he has developed the internal resources to respond effectively and the external relationships and circumstances to provide options and support. Instead of being victimized by unexpected developments, he often benefits from change and uncertainty because he is better positioned than others to adapt and capitalize on new conditions. This strategic orientation requires fundamental shifts in how you think about time, resources, relationships, and objectives. Instead of optimizing for immediate gratification or short-term success, you focus on building capabilities, relationships, and circumstances that provide compounding benefits over decades. This longer time horizon often requires making choices that seem suboptimal in the short term but that create enormous advantages over time. The investment in skills development, relationship building, and strategic positioning requires resources that could be used for immediate consumption or pleasure. The maintenance of strategic reserves requires accepting lower current utilization of time and energy than might be possible with full commitment to immediate opportunities. These trade-offs become easier to accept as you experience the benefits of strategic thinking and as you observe the limitations faced by others who live purely reactively. The person who operates strategically enjoys greater freedom, more interesting opportunities, and better outcomes precisely because he has invested in the capabilities and circumstances that create these advantages. The ultimate goal is not to control every aspect of life, an impossible and anxiety-producing objective, but to develop the wisdom, skills, and resources that allow you to thrive regardless of external circumstances. This is true strength, not the absence of challenges but the presence of capabilities that make you confident in your ability to handle whatever situations arise. The journey toward this level of strategic mastery is challenging but ultimately liberating. Each principle you implement, each skill you develop, and each relationship you strengthen contributes to your growing independence from circumstances beyond your control. This is the deepest form of security, not the guarantee that nothing bad will happen but the confidence that you can handle whatever does happen with grace, wisdom, and effectiveness. The man who destroys his weak self, who eliminates dependencies, develops capabilities, and builds strategic relationships, truly cannot be destroyed by others. He may face challenges and setbacks, but he possesses the resources to adapt, recover, and often emerge stronger than before. This is not invulnerability but resilience, the ability to bend without breaking and to transform obstacles into opportunities for growth and advancement. This transformation is available to anyone willing to invest the time and effort required for systematic self-development and strategic thinking. It requires no special talents or advantages beyond intelligence, discipline, and persistence. The principles are universal, though their application must be adapted to individual circumstances and objectives. The choice is simple but not easy: continue living reactively, hoping for favorable circumstances while fearing negative ones, or begin the systematic work of building strategic capabilities that provide freedom, influence, and resilience regardless of external conditions. The person who chooses the strategic path will find that life becomes not easier but more manageable, not without challenges but with the resources to handle those challenges effectively. This is the ultimate expression of human potential, the conscious direction of one's own development and circumstances in service of objectives that transcend immediate gratification or survival. It is the difference between being shaped by your environment and shaping your environment, between being a victim of circumstances and being a master of circumstances, between hoping for the best and creating the best possible outcomes given available resources and constraints. The work begins today, with honest self-assessment and the first small steps towards systematic improvement. Each day provides opportunities to practice strategic thinking, build relationships, and develop capabilities. The compound effects of consistent effort over time create transformations that seem impossible from today's perspective but that become inevitable through persistent application of proven principles. The path is clear. The principles are known. The only question is whether you will commit to the work required to transform potential into reality, weakness into strength, and reactive living into strategic mastery. The answer to that question will determine not only your success in specific endeavors but the fundamental quality and character of your life experience.